Welcome to God Knows Where. I'm Brett Harris. We've got another little offshoot, a little fork in the road, whatever we want to call these one-off episodes, these things where we're not quite where we've been, but we're not yet to where we're going. And I don't know the right word for what these one-off episodes should be called, but if you do, let me know. I'd love to come up with a great title for these. I do know a couple of things, though. On this little path we're wandering down today, we're going to meet something you never want to cross in the woods. Bears. You may or may not remember that there are bears in the Bible, but there are, and they show up in an awful story in 2 Kings. I first shared these thoughts, my thoughts on this story, in a sermon series we did years ago on animal stories in the Bible, and I hope you enjoy it. I also hope that you've got your voting pants on, or at least have them handy and know that they fit and that you're ready to wear them come July, because y'all helped God Knows Where be nominated as one of the top 5 podcasts in the Best of the Pine Belt competition. And during July, we'll have the chance to vote some more and see if this little exploration of ours can win. More about that to come, and I'll share the link where you can vote. Voting begins July 5th. I'll share all that in the show notes. All I can say right now is thank you. Thanks for all the support, not just simply your nominations, but for listening and for helping others find the show, and by sharing it with others, by reviewing it in Apple Podcasts and giving it a rating wherever you listen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you enjoy today's episode, Male Pattern Harshness. Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You've asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended into a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching out and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in 2 pieces. He picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him, and he went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" When he had struck the water parted to the one side and to the other, and Elijah went over. When the company of prophets who were at Jericho saw him at a distance, they declared, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go away, bald head! Go away, bald head!" When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. From there, he went on to Mount Carmel and then returned to Samaria. We have all kinds of images of bears in our minds. Cute and cuddly teddy bears, polar bears struggling with receding ice caps. We now even have Cocaine Bear. We've got Fozzie and Baloo and Winnie the Pooh, and not to mention this video Elizabeth recently showed me of a frustrated mama bear trying to drag her cubs across a highway while they keep running away and back across. And I've got this image of a bear that a friend just texted me that his father-in-law came upon while he was looking for his cat near my parents' church. But if you need evidence to support Stephen Colbert's decade-long claim while he hosted the Colbert Report that bears are nothing more than soulless, godless killing machines, you need look no further than what I just read. 2 mama bears mauling some kids because one of God's prophets told them to. There are a lot of animals that play pivotal roles in the stories that we read throughout the Bible. There's a dove that brings the olive branch to Noah, letting him know that the flood is over. There's another dove that soars above Jesus as he is baptized, giving further consideration to his uniqueness. We learn a lot from and through animals and the metaphors about them that we hear in our scriptures. God being like a mother hen scooching her brood under her wings for comfort. Religious elites being compared to vipers and so on. There's so many animals we learn from. But I don't think we learn anything from the bears in this story. I think they're merely scapegoats. Scape bears? I don't know. But this story isn't a story about bears, or even, as it's often interpreted, a story about respecting our elders. It's a story about grief and insecurity and how together they're a recipe for disaster. Elisha is insecure. He's insecure about, of all things, being bald. And these boys mocking him only make it worse. He lives in a world in which physical signs of difference were often taken as signs of weakness: pocked skin, red hair, limps, natural body cycles, pregnancy, and yes, baldness. There's evidence that baldness, though common, wasn't always revered when Elisha was alive, and even further, that long hair was a sign of strength and commitment to one's faith. But Elisha's baldness is more than something about which he's insecure. It's a reminder of something else that he's lost, someone that he's lost. You see, remember, not too long before Elisha ends up in the wilderness bald with the bears and the boys, he was standing not far from there in the wilderness with his mentor Elijah, the prophet, the one who called him to join him and be his successor, the man whom he had literally dropped everything for in a field to follow. And there, in that wilderness, Elijah was taken away from him in a cloud of smoke and fire, leaving Elisha to figure out where he was to go and what he was to do and how he was to follow God all alone. The story we read doesn't say this, but elsewhere in Scripture we're told that baldness, or at least the shaving of one's head, was a sign of mourning. We don't know if Elisha was genetically bald or if he had shaved his head in mourning Elijah's death, but his reaction to the children's joking and the fact that he tore his clothes in half after Elijah died makes me think that he might have done that he might have shaved his head in mourning, that he was keenly aware of why he was bald and he didn't need any more reminders. His grief was still raw and in the front of his mind. I have to believe that Elisha was still mourning when those boys came upon him, still grieving, still unmoored by Elijah's departure. And those boys, being boys, said the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong person. They struck a nerve. It amplified his insecurity and his grief, and it led him to try to dampen his grief and prove his worth with powerful violence. And unless Elisha was a psychopath, I'm sure the violence done to them did nothing of the sort. It only made it worse. It only amplified his grief and flooded him with more uncertainty and left him wondering how he could be who God wanted him to be if he could do something like this to some young boys. We talk a lot at our house about how, let's say, if our brother hits us, we don't hit back because that only leaves two people hurting. And no one feels good. It solves nothing. It just adds more pain. The same is true with our insecurities, our grief. It's true that when we're stressed out or exhausted or wound tight and worn out, that it's easy to lash out. It's easy to fight fire with fire, to yell when we're yelled at, to scream when it feels like no one's listening, or to fight boys with bears, to hurt others because we are hurting, because we're scared, because we're worried, because we're sad. I know. I've been there. That's why I knew I needed to go to therapy, and that's partly why I'm not a pastor anymore. I wasn't sicking angry bears on my boys or any parishioners who may have been causing me problems. I wasn't doing any of that when folks pushed my buttons, but there were too many mornings and evenings where, had a bear been nearby, I might have considered it. The stress and the strain of pastoring, the weight of my own insecurity, and my feeble attempts to hold the grief and the stress and the pain of the folks I served, it turned me into a tinderbox at home. I knew something had to change. I mean, our lashing out from these places and these perspectives and these feelings that we have that we bury inside us, it might not result in the premature death of 42 young boys at the hands of 2 wild mama bears, but it can and does cause pain and estrangement, and it erodes trust and comfort in those around us. It makes our lives and the lives of others worse. It doesn't make anything better. And we have to find better ways to deal with and confront our pains and insecurities than lashing out when we're angry or upset or grieving. If there's a television show that embodies this idea more than any others, I think it's Mindy Kaling's Never Have I Ever. Watch it. It's on Netflix. It's completed. All 4 seasons are there. Go and watch it. Devi Vishnukumar, the show's lead, is a wildly brilliant young woman. She's wildly brilliant, at least when it comes to school, and she's woefully misguided when it comes to just about everything else. She's a nerd who desperately wants to be cool, and I feel like I can say that about her because I'm one too. And as she comes of age in the show a little more each season, she's constantly tripping over her words or trying to be what she thinks everyone else thinks is perfect, so she can get into Princeton, where she and her dad talked about going to college. And she is so insecure that she finds herself regularly tucking her tail between her legs to apologize to her friends, to apologize for something she's done to hurt someone she loves. And so many of her struggles come from the fact that she's still grieving her dad's death. He was her guiding light. He was the only one she believed understood her. He was the one who set her dreams for her, and she is lost without him. Like Elisha, she watched at a very young age as the man she loved the most and respected the most died in front of her. And all the hearts she breaks and all the friendships she mangles, all the stress she causes her mother, it's all because, like Elisha, she hasn't figured out how to work through her grief and manage her insecurity. She lets the triggers trigger her. And we're all trying to figure out this life. We're all trying to figure out how to move through this world that brings us so much joy at times, and at the same time, so many experiences and emotions that we have no idea how to navigate. Loss, pain, change, grief, sadness. It can be so easy to release our frustrations by sicking bears onto those who remind us of our pain, those who bring it to the forefront of our mind when we wanted to bury it deep. We can do these things and cause this pain and expect everything to be all right. But it won't be. And all it does is turn bears into exactly what Stephen Colbert joked they were. And our grief or pain or insecurity, it'll remain. It won't go anywhere. It might even get worse. But there's a thing that helps Davy. And it could have helped Elisha, and it could have spared 42 boys their lives, and it could help us too. The thing that ends up helping Davy avoid causing further harm to others is advice she gets from her therapist. She tells Davy that when she gets ramped up or anxious or angry, to listen to something that calms her down, to listen to something that re-centers her and takes her out of the moment and gives her some perspective. For her, for Davy, it's a voicemail from her dad. I don't know what it is for you, for me, but I know that we need to find it. Because if this passage teaches us anything, it's that we, like Davy, need to find something that we can turn to when someone strikes a nerve that hits us squarely in our feelings, the feelings we want to hide, and that makes us want to lash out. And we need to find that so that we don't lash out, so that we don't cause any more pain than is already present in the world. John Fogel at Whole Parent, whom I've mentioned before on the podcast, suggests that when our insecurities and our frustrations get triggered, that we should move our bodies, that we should get out of the space we're in for a moment and move our body, do some jumping jacks, a walk, whatever, to reground us. Movement a word, a scripture, an image, a song, a voicemail, whatever. We owe it to ourselves and to everyone around us to find what we need to help us process our grief and our emotions, to recenter us in the world, and to be better, to be the best versions of ourselves we can be. I firmly believe that every story in Scripture can teach us something, even hard, tough, violent ones like this one. It's not always found in the actions of the people we read about or in the words that they speak to our ears. Sometimes what we learn, what we're reminded of, sometimes we're reminded by them of what we need to do to not end up like them, to be different, to be better, to leave the patterns of harsh responses that we're accustomed to, that we've held on to, and that we know aren't good for anyone. There's too much good in the world. There's too much good in us. There's too much work in front of us to be who God called us to be and to help others see who God calls them to be, for us to let our fears and our grief lead us to hurt others. God called Elisha for a purpose, and God calls each and every one of us for a purpose too. Let's go find ours, and let's leave the bears out of it. God Knows Where is written, produced, and edited by me, Brett Harris, with music by Thomas Steinwinder and Michael Trest, and unwavering support from my wife, Elizabeth. If you like what you hear, I'd encourage you to share God Knows Where with your friends and family, and give us a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this show. It would mean the world to me, and it'll help more people find God Knows Where. Thanks in advance for your help and for being here and for listening. Until next time, take these words from William Sloane Coffin with you. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short. Grace to risk something big for something good. Grace to remember that the world is too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. So may God take your minds and think through them, your eyes and see through them, and your hearts and set them on fire.